When you have an object that has more than just a single material applied to it, like maybe the one that we're looking at here, that object will require that different mapping coordinates be applied to different areas on its surface. For example, the design on the top of the object would need to be mapped in a completely different way than the patterns that you see both covering the middle and the bottom. Each set of wallpaper instructions required to properly wrap each skin would need to be added not at the object level, but instead at the sub-object level, to a selected series of polygons, in other words. This video will demonstrate that technique. Using a file named subobject mapping that can be found in the working files folder, let's see what we can do. Now, a little earlier in this chapter, during a video entitled Building a Multi-Subobject Material, I mentioned that 3ds Max offered several different techniques that can be used to apply multiple materials to a single object. One of those techniques was covered during the Building a Multi-Subobject Material video. An alternative method to applying multiple materials will be demonstrated here. Let's get things started by first creating the materials that we'll be applying to our object. Using the currently selected sample slot in the top left corner of the material editor, let's name our first material Leather Brown. In loading the image that we'll use to create that skin, we'll now jump up on the diffuse branch, choosing a bitmap. Let's now navigate to the Chapter 11 folder in the working files, choosing the image Leather Brown. Clicking on the View button in the lower left-hand corner of the dialog will display a full version of that image. Once loaded, we can begin building our second material. Doing that on the sample slot directly to the right of the leather brown skin. For this one, let's name it Pattern Blue Diamond. And we'll again jump up on the diffuse branch, choosing a bitmap. This time in the Working Files folder, we'll choose the map Pattern Blue Diamond. Heading over to our third and last material, we'll name that Wood Boards. Jumping up on its diffuse color branch, we'll again choose a bitmap. This time around, choosing the image Wood Fence Boards. Okay, with all three materials now built, let's apply the brown material to the top of our object, the part that kind of looks like a dome. Let's select the object, then head over to the modifier stack on the right-hand side of the interface. In the stack, we'll open up the editable mesh entry going down to the polygon level. Now, to ensure that we select only the correct polygons, let's change our window crossing selection tool up on the left-hand side of the toolbar so that the white cube is in the middle of the icon. That'll basically mean that we'll have to go all the way around a polygon in order to be able to select it. Now, back in our front view, we'll select our polys. With those selected, we'll head back to the material editor, selecting the brown leather material. Now it's simply a matter of dragging and dropping things into place. Pulling our skin into our viewport but away from the object, you'll notice the cursor is followed by a no sign. You'll see that disappear once you get directly on top of your selected polys. Only once the no sign has disappeared from the cursor will we then let go of our mouse. Once the material's in place, back in the material editor, we should see white triangles around the borders of the skin. We can then activate Show Material in Viewport down on the horizontal row of icons. Okay, now these particular polygons are going to need a separate source of mapping. Back in the command panel, we'll open up the modifier list, heading down to the UVWMap modifier. Now, what kind of mapping do you think would best work for stamping our leather image onto these polys? Let's try the shrink wrap mapping. This will drape our map over the top of the polygons, pinching the image at the bottom, which is an area that we won't see. Once you've made the change over to shrink wrap, you'll notice that the mapping gizmo is a little bit small for our selected polys. Let's head down to the alignment section, clicking on Fit. Okay, now even though it's been resized, the mapping appears to be riding a little bit high on the polys. To fix that, we'll open up the UVMap modifier going down to the gizmo level. With the gizmo now selected, in our front view, we'll drop the curvature of the gizmo down to match the curvature on the top of our polygons. Once we have that in place, let's go ahead and render our perspective view. Looking good. So far, things are going according to plan. For the middle area, we'll again need to make a polygon selection. The Edit Mesh modifier seems to work best when using the drag and drop technique that we're using here. Now, we don't want to mess with anything that we've already added into the stack. So let's simply add another edit mesh on top of things. Once we've done that, we'll open the modifier, heading down to the polygon selection level. For this selection, we'll change our window crossing tool back to crossing. We can then, in the front view, simply window directly across the middle polygons. With those now selected, let's go ahead and grab our blue diamond material, pulling it into our view. Now again, don't let go of the mouse until the no sign has disappeared from your cursor. If you've made a good connection, you'll again see white triangles around the blue diamond material. Let's turn on the Show Material in Viewport option for this skin too. Now to map our polys, we'll again need an additional UVW map modifier. Let's go ahead and add that in. As far as our specific mapping method, let's change from planar over to cylindrical. With that in place, we can again activate our perspective view and render again. Okay, 2 for 2. Now for the bottom area, we'll again make a poly selection. Let's return to the modifier list, adding another edit mesh modifier. Getting down to the polygon level, we'll again alternate our window crossing selection tool. We can now, back in the front view, make our polygon selection. With those polygons now selected, let's apply our wood fence board material. This time around, I'll choose to use the Assign Material to Selection icon on the horizontal row of commands below the sample slots. You'll find it on the left-hand side, third one in from the edge. Now, if things are correctly applied, we should have white triangles around all 3 of our materials. Okay, the mapping on the bottom, what style do you think we ought to use? Let's first of all get our UVW map modifier in place. From the mapping styles, and taking in consideration the shape of our selected polys, let's change the method over to box. Back in the material editor, we'll also want to activate our Show Material in Viewport option. Okay, let's go ahead and render our perspective view again. Now that the materials have been applied, let's go in and make a few adjustments. We'll close the render, then clear out the sample slots in the material editor. Using the Pick Material from Object command directly to the left of where you name your materials, we'll now get the material back into the editor. Now when we do, there's a couple of different things that I want you to notice. First of all, our material has automatically been converted to a multi-sub-object skin. You'll see that on the right-hand side directly below the horizontal row of icons. Secondly, down below, you'll show all 3 skins showing not just a thumbnail picture, but also their names to the right. This will make things easy to both access and adjust the individual skins. Now before we do that though, let's enlarge our perspective view, then convert it to an active shade. We can resize it simply by positioning our mouse where the 4 viewports come together, holding down our left mouse button, then dragging up and over to the left. Let's now turn off the Save Frames option that's been activated in the viewport by typing Shift F. We can also just as easily go up to the name Perspective, then from the list choosing Show Save Frames. Now before zooming in on our object, let's go up to the Views pull-down menu and save the current viewport configuration. This will enable us to return to that view once we decide to do our final render. Okay, once that's done, we can zoom a little closer in on our object. Let's now activate the active shade. We'll go back to the viewport name in the upper left-hand corner, choosing Extended Viewports, Active Shade. Let's see what we can now do about changing our skins. On the brown leather, let's add a little shine. Once we've made it onto the material, we'll change the specular level to 15 and the glossiness to 25. The nice thing about the active shade is it gives us a live connection from the material editor back to the render. So anytime we make an adjustment on one of our skins, the render will update. Why don't we also add a little bump mapping to the leather? Let's head down to the map section, instancing the leather brown map down to the bump channel. Let's take our bump value up to 50 and see how that looks. Now that might be just a little bit too much. Let's take that down to 40. Okay, in the material editor, let's go to our parent, accessing the blue diamond material. When we're on the skin, we'll want to specifically jump up on the diffuse map branch. You can do that by simply clicking on the capital M to the right of the diffuse color swatch. Let's change our tiling to 10 and 5. To work on the wood boards on the bottom of the object, we'll again click on Go to Parent. Now you'll have to do that twice, being that you're on the map branch of the blue diamond material. Once having accessed the wood boards, we'll again get up on the diffuse map branch. Okay, let's see how the wood boards would look if they traveled not vertically along the object, but horizontally. We can make that change by taking the W angle to 90. Frankly, after the adjustment, I think they look better standing straight up and down. Let's go ahead and take the W angle back to 0 by right-clicking on either of its spinners. Let's now tile the boards 2 and 1. Now, on both ends, you'll notice that the last board has been pretty much split in half. We can even things out by taking our U offset to right around 0.03. I'll get it there by simply clicking on the spinner a couple times. Each time you click, notice how the boards have been shifted over just a little bit. Okay, with things in place, let's now close our active shade by right-clicking in the window, choosing Close. We can now restore the original layout of our perspective view, going to the View's pull-down menu and choosing Restore Active Perspective View. Once that's done, let's go ahead and render. So that's the scoop when needing to map at the sub-object level. Now you're going to be using the technique continually in your own projects, so take the time to learn it well. I'm going to go ahead and save this out as Sub-Object Mapping Completed if you'd like to look it over.